Hello everyone, you could have wasted your time doing anything, but you decided to waste it with me and my review of Final Fantasy VIII, the much anticipated follow-up to Final Fantasy VII. As we all know at this point, Final Fantasy VII was the game that turned the entire industry upside down. It was a root cause for the rapidly growing popularity of Japanese role-playing games in the West. But as I mentioned in my video for that game, it also introduced many different elements to a myriad of players. This included an accessible yet experimental progression system, a large focus on narrative with nuanced character development, and of course, the implementation of fully rendered cutscenes. It was a game that had people eager to see what Square could come up with in order to compete with such a groundbreaking title. A sequel that underwent the daunting task of filling Final Fantasy VII's size 17 shoes. And that sequel came in the form of Final Fantasy VIII, a game that has gone on to become rather divisive within the fandom as well as the general gaming populace as a whole. I mean, like I had already mentioned in my RE3 remake review, any game following up such a success is bound to disappoint at least some people. It's an inevitability. However, much like with the RE3 remake, Final Fantasy VIII's reception has less to do with that of its predecessors and has everything to do with how much of an overall mess this game is. Yeah, listen, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. I think this game is a total fucking mess. I've played through it from beginning to end 3 times, and while my views on the game did indeed grow less sour, I can still safely say that this is one of the weakest entries in the series. Though with that being said, I do not think that Final Fantasy VIII is a bad game overall. Hence why I called it one of the weakest as opposed to one of the worst. It is, however, a game that tried to do way too many wild and experimental things that didn't translate into a very fun game all too well. To put it in the best way I could, Final Fantasy VIII is an amalgamation of admittedly bold ideas that, while commendable on paper, fall flat in execution. This stems from everything to the progression system, to the characters, to the presentation, to its overall themes. But perhaps the most notable idea, and perhaps the biggest aspect that has given this game its mixed reputation, is the Junction system. Christ, that was probably my longest intro yet. Anywho, the Junction system is essentially the backbone of the entire game, as several different elements from the combat to the card minigame to even the narrative all work in tandem with this system. It is a system so nuanced in its mechanics, yet so trivial in how the players can easily exploit them. A system so rewarding with the way it allows you to build your characters, yet so tedious in practice. Yes, you can already tell how torn I am on this system, but before I delve deep into anything, allow me to discuss the thing that everyone can agree is horseshit. Ahem. Tutorials! So many bloody tutorials, oh my fucking god! Let me make myself clear. What I'm about to tell you is not an exaggeration. It's an educated guess and a rough estimate, but not an exaggeration nonetheless. Within the first hour of this game, about 10 to 15 minutes of it is spent reading through the most needlessly convoluted tutorials you will ever see. The first portion of this game before the Seed Trials, or whatever the fuck that event is called, has some excruciatingly slow pacing, because Quistis just absolutely felt the need to carefully run through every minute detail with a fine-tooth comb, which all this ends up doing is scaring away first-time players. Nobody wants to sit through an endless sludge of tutorials that overcomplicate a system that isn't even that difficult to understand. You siphon magic in a variety of different ways, you junction said magic to your character stats, depending on whatever GFs you have selected for that same character. And that's about it. Obviously, that's just an oversimplification made for time's sake, but even then, the Junction system truly and honestly isn't that difficult to understand. So when you're wasting the player's time with these ridiculous tutorials, it just makes first-timers want to drop the game and never touch it again. I vividly remember my first time playing this game, and by the time Quistis was going over some things for the millionth time, I was ready to call it quits. And it was during the summertime where I was sitting in my muggy bedroom with no air conditioning or even a fucking oscillating fan. I just did not have the patience to put up with this shit. And you know what? You shouldn't have to either. But enough about trivial shit like tutorials, because now is the time to actually analyze and discuss the Junction system and the huge double-edged sword that it is. Many folks, myself included, have written off the Junction system as having limited means of obtaining magic. No, you do not have to constantly rely on draw points or draw on magic from enemies until you've stacked up an exact 100 for every fucking type of magic. If you use this method, you'll be burned out by the end of the first disc guaranteed, even if you are playing the remaster and have access to the speed up feature. You are doing yourself a great disservice by neglecting to explore the many different ways you can obtain magic. As someone who's beaten this game 3 times, I can say with utmost certainty that drawing magic is actually a very bad way to get magic. What you'll want to do instead is to refine magic from the cards and items in your inventory, or leveling up magic you already have via GF skills. This will save you a lot of trouble in ensuring you're stocked up on magic, because one item can actually give the character of your choosing a good chunk of magic, all with half of the tedium it takes to draw quantities of 100 for every single type of magic. This also happens to be a way more fun and rewarding method of engaging with this system, because rather than grinding my way to acquire magic, I get to refine it from items I've collected through defeating enemies and cards I've won in Triple Triad. To put things simply, acquiring magic feels like something I'm getting rewarded for, rather than something I have to slog through in order to artificially make myself feel more powerful. Drawing magic is, all in all, just a terrible way to play this game. Although I can't exactly fault people for adopting this method too much, because it certainly is tempting. You know, when you come across a type of magic you don't currently have, the first thing you want to do is take as much of it as you can all at once. It's like having keys get dangled in front of my face. But I will reiterate that this method can cause serious damage to your psyche. It will leave you in a bored and exhausted mess, sulking in your $300 gaming chair, as you slog your way into getting 100 as soonest for everyone on your team like it's fucking Christmas. But getting the magic is just step 1 in this junction system now. Step 2 is to actually junction it to your characters. I droned on and on about how Final Fantasy VII's materia system opened up a huge opportunity for character customization, and that can also be applied to Final Fantasy VIII's junction system, though to a lesser extent of course. You're pretty much free in terms of how you want to customize your character, as any type of magic can be junctioned to any stat, so as long as your Guardian Force has it unlocked. GFs also possess a multitude of abilities, such as Card Mod and Mug, which can also be equipped in order to create a wide variety of different character builds. And the added option of exchanging magic between characters gives the player the option of having characters be evenly split, or having the active party hog all the magic. All the while, you can just give your unused character all of your best magic whenever the characters get separated for plot-related reasons. The junction system may be a little weird and obtuse, but it's certainly not without its charm. This system is not only a unique take on character progression, but it offers plenty of different ways of actually acquiring magic, and different ways to use said magic. And of course, the absolute satisfaction of watching my character's stats just inflate like the E621 trending page will always fill me with joy. However, sadly, my praise towards the system will have to end there, as I just did not like this system, and I did not feel it translated into a fun gameplay loop very well. Yes, I gave credit where credit is due, but unfortunately, I still can't say I enjoyed the junction system as a whole. But my grips with this system mainly comes down to how it's presented during actual combat. I already mentioned the multitude of ways to draw, refine, and upgrade magic, but I've come to notice that a vast majority of Final Fantasy VIII's gameplay revolves around finding and/or acquiring magic instead of actually putting it to use, which obviously doesn't make for fun combat encounters. Considering that magic is more of a collectible item with an actual quantity, you are practically discouraged from using it because it'll end up bringing your stats down. But of course, there exists a counter-argument of only using magic you don't have junctioned. And my answer to that is, oh, I don't know. Maybe I was planning on saving that magic for later, for when I unlock my next GF ability or something along those lines. I can't help but feel like every time I use magic in this game, I'm taking a very much unneeded risk of some sort. Whether it's affecting me now or later on down the road, using your magic in combat is detrimental in one way or another. So unfortunately, the best course of action during combat encounters is to pour all of your best magic into strength and just spam the attack command. Well, either that or summoning GFs and watching their 4-hour attack animations. And obviously, that just doesn't make gameplay very fun at all. The game at least tries to circumvent this issue by giving us a draw and cast function, but a lot of the time the black magic you can draw from these enemies aren't going to do shit, because it's usually magic they're resistant to, so, you know, that's disappointing. But you see, the funny thing is, just using the attack command again and again isn't going to have serious backfire, because everything you encounter in this game is so piss fucking easy, it's actually kind of insane. Yes, I know that Final Fantasy games don't tend to be very difficult, but Final Fantasy VIII is a special case, because this is a game where getting a game over feels harder than actually winning a battle. And this is mainly due to two things. The first of which is the leveling system, which I will get to momentarily, while the second of which is how ridiculously broken the Junction system truly is. Having the most basic understanding of the game's fundamentals can lead to a player very easily exploiting them. I'm well aware that the other systems across the history of Final Fantasy can also be exploited. But the difference between, say, the Materia system versus the Junction system is that the latter doesn't require any strategic or clever experimentation with its systems in order to break your character. The Materia system can be exploited, yes, but it takes time and effort, whereas with the Junction system, learning the card mod ability basically ensures that you've already won the game. What, did you think that I'd have to get creative with these mechanics? You think I'm gonna adopt some sort of strategy? Fuck that! Just turn every mob you face into a card, then just refine whatever magic you can learn from said card. And it's not at all like Final Fantasy IX's blue magic mechanic, where you have to carefully strategize how you're going to whittle down a target's HP to 25% without actually making the mistake of killing it. No, just hit it a few times and you should be able to Pokemon their ass fairly easily. And this lack of difficulty is further elevated by the game's ridiculous leveling system. Instead of enemies already having a fixed experience level, they just level up alongside you. This further eliminates any sense of difficulty, because you can very easily just avoid leveling up while still being able to receive AP through modded enemies in boss fights. This system makes it to where even the toughest bosses can get absolutely shat on. I get the reason why systems like this were implemented. It was to eliminate level grinding. But all it ended up doing was creating other problems, such as the absence of strategic gameplay, as well as this repetitive fucking menuing. Jesus Christ, up in heaven! You could spend upwards of 10 minutes at a time in the menus refining magic, junction and magic, whatever the fuck. The process of actually junctioning magic is simple enough. Whatever stat you plan on increasing should have corresponding magic junction to it, i.e. white magic to HP and black magic to strength. However, when it comes to the actual values each spell influences for each and every stat, it can sometimes feel completely arbitrary. So you have to spend a dubious amount of time in the menus surfing through your magic inventory to find out which spells will have the biggest impact for each stat. For each character you're currently using too, mind you. So congratulations, you did away with level grinding, but you inadvertently introduced an even more arduous issue that was responsible for lots and lots of groans, as well as the contemplation to uninstall this game from my Xbox. Yes, I am one of the 7 people on this earth who plays JRPGs on Xbox. Please don't make fun of me. Yeah, at this point, it goes without saying that I don't particularly care for the Junction system all too much. Overall, I do at least admire the Junction system for being pretty damn innovative. However, the way it was designed led to uninteresting, dare I say boring combat encounters, where using magic will actually hurt you, along with the added bonus of strategy being obsolete. But again, I will praise its originality as well as the attempt to cut down a traditional JRPG level grinding. Yes, this game did a mostly good job in circumventing the most reviled trope of JRPGs, but sadly, since we can never have anything good in life, the elimination of one issue resulted in a host of far more obnoxious ones. The Junction system is different, absolutely, and that is a quality in and of itself. But I get the feeling that the devs were too busy creating a system that's different rather than creating one that's actually fun. I have also yet to mention the lack of mechanical differences between the characters. Final Fantasy VII had this issue as well. I went over it in great detail during my review of that game. But in that review, I'll admit I kinda made a mistake. You see, I mentioned that Final Fantasy VIII also had this problem to a much larger degree. Replaying this game has made me realize that is not true. Matter of fact, these two games are about an equal footing when it comes to this issue. Final Fantasy VIII doesn't have shit like the range mechanic, but it does at least give a few characters their own unique traits to help make them stand out. However, as far as I know, Squall, Rinoa, and Quistis are the only characters that possess their own unique mechanics, with Squall's Gunblade, Rinoa's Canine of Terror, and Quistis' Blue Magic. All of which are neat, though I can't say that I'm 100% pleased with the RNG behind Angelo Rush. Anyway, aside from limit breaks and a few mechanics here and there, I don't see much of anything separating these characters. It's the one major flaw in Final Fantasy VII that got repeated in a game with a much worse system. Awesome. Now, as for limit breaks, they function the same way as they did in FF7. Getting your shit kicked in will eventually allow you to unleash your limit break. However, there are two big factors which led to an overall much more improved limit system. Yes, you heard that right. Out of all the things Final Fantasy VIII did worse than its predecessor, the one thing it did improve upon was the limit break system. First and foremost, once the limit break becomes available, you'll still have the option to use the attack command, which saves me the trouble of either wasting it or being forced to use other attacks for the time being. The limit break also triggers whenever a character reaches critical health, which adds an element of risk-reward to this mechanic. The limit breaks themselves are so fantastic, with the exception of Rinoa's god-awful Angela win. Renzakuken, for instance, is basically Omni-Slash on steroids, and you have access to it at the very start of the game, so there you go. I wish there were more limit breaks you can learn, but aside from that, Final Fantasy VIII definitely has the best take on super moves, right next to Final Fantasy X. It also has the best take on acquiring Jill. Now, normally, currency in an RPG is earned through looting enemies, finding them in treasure chests, so on and so forth. But not in Final Fantasy VIII, because this game introduces a unique system of earning Jill. Emphasis on the term earned, because the way Jill works in this game is quite literally like a salary from your job. You get paid a certain amount of Jill at different times, depending on your seed rank. And you can increase your seed rank by killing enemies, taking seed exams, as well as during certain story events, depending on how well you do them. It's an interesting system that makes earning Jill feel like a genuine reward, as opposed to something you can just easily farm. But sadly, the game shoots itself in the foot with yet another innovative mechanic. Seed ranks are an awesome way to earn Jill, but what's the point of introducing a unique currency system when there's nothing to spend your hard-earned money on? Weapons cost dick. Most of the best items are looted from enemies, and again, curative items are for scrubs. With there being next to nothing to buy in this game, it renders this neat little salary system utterly redundant. A lot of the mechanics in this game are like that, matter of fact. But there is one mechanic that is completely 110% worth it, no dispute. A mechanic where you can put a lot in and get a lot out in return. A mechanic that is both fun and rewarding. Since I've already discussed everything I needed to regarding the junction system, limit breaks, what have you, I suppose now would be the best time to finally address the true meat of this game. Triple Triad is a minigame I have sunk countless hours into across my 3 playthroughs, far more than I'm ever willing to admit. But honestly, who can blame me when it's this goddamn addicting? It's such a simplistic game too, like all you need to do is place cards next to your opponents when they have a higher value. But I think the simplicity is what makes this game so replayable. There aren't any complicated rules, there's no element of luck or randomness. Treachermaster, Tetramaster, It's a fun, straightforward card game. It also just so happens to be extremely rewarding as well. If you've been paying a lick of attention this entire time, you'll remember me talking about how you can refine magic from cards. That essentially eliminates the need to tire yourself out by constantly drawing magic from mobs. And with some of these cards, you can get some seriously amazing rewards out of refining them. Like, for instance, a Marlboro can give you, what, 40 bios or some shit like that? But see, here's the thing though. A minigame such as this is bound to have some repetition, right? I mean, it's a card game. Card games can get seriously fucking repetitive. But not Triple Triad. I mean, yes, there are obviously some elements of repetition to the game, but the thing is, each region you travel to throughout the game, be it Balam, Fisherman's Horizon, Galbadia, what have you, all of them have their own set of rules. And you can combine them with the rules you've already learned, which manages to keep Triple Triad feeling fresh throughout the game. Because now there's a whole new layer of strategy added with even the simplest of rule changes, whether it's elemental rules, or the rule where you're able to take an entire deck of cards. I could go on and on and on about everything that makes Triple Triad one of the best, if not the best pieces of side content to ever grace this franchise. I would honestly take it a step further and say that dropping $40 for this game is worth it just to play some Triple Triad. Final Fantasy VIII is literally just a card game simulator but with a bonus story. That's how superior this minigame is when compared to the core gameplay loop. But that might be kind of sad, depending on who you're asking. a minigame being better than the actual main bulk of the game. Yeah, some games will do that. There's also 2 side quests involving Triple Triad, which I'll definitely have to get into at some point. You know, assuming I ever want to play this goddamn game again. But anyway, Triple Triad, fun, addicting, varied, rewarding, has a fun and bouncy theme song, and speaking of which... For some odd reason, I never really talked about the soundtrack during my Final Fantasy VII review. The most I did was make a few offhand comments here and there. Didn't even give it its own segment in the video. Damn. Well, anyway, Nobuo Uematsu is a well-known composer, one of the most celebrated composers in the medium's history, matter of fact. And listening to this OST, it's not hard to see why that is. Final Fantasy VIII doesn't quite have my favorite OST in the series. That merit definitely goes to Final Fantasy VI, but it is perhaps the most eclectic affair across the franchise. Lots of different styles and instruments are used to help illustrate the different locations within the world or set pieces within the story. And it's all done so brilliantly. From things like New Age, Waltz, Classical, Electronic, Funk, what have you, Uematsu adopts a variety of different musical genres, showing his respect and knowledge for said genres so much that he's able to use them in a variety of different contexts, such as when he uses funk for the missile-based operation, which gives that part of the story an old-school spy mission James Bondy type of vibe. That song is also just a vibe in general. Much of the OST is like that too, and of course, good chill, fun music sounds even better when it's all crafted by what I consider to be the greatest sound font of the PS1 era. And of course, we can't talk about Final Fantasy VIII's soundtrack without at least making a mention to the game's overall theme, Eyes on Me. Which, yes, is corny, is saccharine, is completely over the top with its sentiments, but damn is it a hard-hitting tune. And it's used perfectly within the game as well. I love how that scene within the Ragnarok has speech boxes which come and go on a fixed schedule, which force the song to play throughout its entirety. But anyway, it is a nice song. I like how the instrumental gets bigger and more evocative as it progresses. The melodies on that track are pretty fantastic as well. It's also technically impressive given the hardware it was featured on. Final Fantasy VII had already taken advantage of the PlayStation's new 3D rendering capabilities, but it was Final Fantasy VIII that took advantage of the console's CD format by composing a song with both vocals and live instrumentation. Again, I can only assume what it was like hearing this for the first time back when the game first came out. Like, this was at a time when video games were still using MIDIs and sound fonts, so to hear such a high quality song that sounds like an actual song you'd hear on the radio or something must have been impressive. Speaking of impressive, boy, the presentation sure got an overhaul compared to its predecessor. Final Fantasy VII had some pretty slick FMVs, but its sequel took that part of the game and cranked that shit up to an 11. More details on character models and backgrounds, better looking FMVs, and well, more FMVs too. Hell, within the first hour of starting Final Fantasy VIII, you've basically seen nearly as many FMVs as the entirety of 7. Each and every party member is even introduced by an FMV. They really went all out with these shits. But enough about how much CGI there is. How does it actually look? For the most part, good. Really good, matter of fact. This is among the best looking games on the PS1. The visual depth and detail is absolutely stunning for the time, and even today it still don't look half bad. Though I did notice a bit of a compression issue with the FMVs on the remastered version. The other two PS1 FFs look great in all the remastered glory, but for some reason, FF8 got the short end of the stick. The CG is so horribly compressed that you can actually count the pixels that appear on screen. And I can't say I like the updated character models for the remaster either. Granted, they don't look nearly as awful as Final Fantasy X's did in its remaster, but still. I love me some detail, but the remastered models look a bit too detailed. It looks like they stuck PS2 quality models and chucked them on a PS1 quality backgrounds. It just looks off sometimes. Also, what's with the characters' idle stances? Why are they slouched like that? They look like zombies. I don't know what type of shit the Guardians gotta be doing to have their posture look like this, but I can't say it's anything pretty. Side quests are pretty much just alright for the most part. I guess you can say they're another mixed bag. Some of them are of the typical Final Fantasy quality, most notably the Deep Sea Research Center, but there are some others that are pretty underwhelming, either in terms of content or rewards or even both, like the Obel Lake side quest for example. Sadly, the Chocobo minigame this time around falls into the latter's category. Make no mistake, it's way better than the Chocobo breeding in 7, but the rewards you earn this time around make this particular minigame feel rather inconsequential. Again, the gameplay is pretty fun. I like how it's an actual puzzle this time around as opposed to something that consists of waiting for the RNG gods to give you what you want. However, had I but known the type of rewards I'd be getting from the side quests, I simply wouldn't have even bothered. You get like 1 or 2 stones for spells in each of the forests and that's about it. What the fuck are you supposed to do with a single flare? The Guardian Force related side quests can really go either way in terms of something you really want to do versus something that's so mind-numbingly tedious, you'll find it in your best interest to give up. The GF Brothers, for example, has such an agonizing side quest tied to its acquisition. It comes during the end of Disc 1, where you're running around through this labyrinth trying to find a Lost Seeds ID. Anytime where it feels like a guide is absolutely necessary in order to complete something, well, there's a fucking issue already. And in the case of the Brothers side quests, you'll most certainly need a guide to properly traverse with the maze in order to complete this quest, especially on a first playthrough. This headache could have been somewhat avoided if they had just given you slight visual differences between the rooms, so you can have a less stressful time in determining where the fuck you even are. Literally all you get is this really vague map that isn't helping anyone in the slightest. Like, where the fuck do you think I am? This map is telling me nothing! Thank God we get some cool boss fights and a killer GF out of this, for had we not, this entire side quest would not be worth a fraction of anyone's time. Diablos, Cerberus, and Doom Train are won by activating an item you can acquire in the story, so there's not much to say about those guys. However, with Doom Train, it requires a couple of certain items that could be a pain in the ass to get, especially the Marlboro tentacle. Like, trying to get Marlboros to spawn in that one forest or whatever is a pain in the fucking ass. And according to guides, that's where Marlboros are most likely to spawn. And I was running around for like a half hour before one showed up, then I just gave up. Yeah, so yeah, these GF side quests, yeah, they are the definition of hit or miss. However, Bahamut and Eden are walking through what is one of the coolest side quests in this franchise, and easily my favorite one in this particular installment. It's got atmosphere, it's got this immersive air of ambiguity, it's got puzzle solving, and of course, it's got 2 boss fights that are pretty decent in the grand scheme of things pertaining to this game. Bahamut's a bit of a pushover who, weirdly enough, hardly even attacked me. Ultimate Weapon, on the other hand, was definitely a bit more of a challenge. The only thing I really disliked about this side quest is the rather annoying Simon Says bullshit in the beginning. But aside from that, this is a pretty fantastic side quest, where it's not only a neat addition to the game narrative-wise, but the rewards make the whole thing worth it. This is the blueprint that every side quest in a video game should follow. But there is also one last side quest I need to get to. I saved this one for last because I consider it to be the worst side quest of them all. This might be a hot take or not. I'm not exactly sure because I haven't read up on the quality of side quests and like the community or whatever. But enough stalling. The side quest I'm referring to is the Odin side quest. This is useless, completely fucking useless. Had I known what I would be getting myself into and what type of reward I would have gotten from doing the side quests, again, I would not have even fucking done it. No second guessing, no contemplation, I just straight up, nope, would have avoided it like the fucking plague. I was hyped to do this side quest too, because gameplay wise, it's interesting. You gotta go through this like tower under a certain time period. I think it's like 20 minutes or something. All the while you gotta be solving puzzles, avoiding enemies, defeating enemies as fast as you can, and shit like that. But then you actually get to Odin himself, only to find out that it's a boss fight that doesn't attack you. A boss fight that doesn't attack you. What the fuck kind of shit is that? Like, way to waste my time with some shit like that. I was expecting a really fucking fun boss fight, but no. But either way, I got Odin now. I got Odin now. I did that side quest. I acquired Odin. I did all that. Great. It's all fine and dandy. So, what the fuck is Odin gonna do now? Why, he is going to very, very arbitrarily swoop in and just straight up give you a W. Like, outright. He just gives you a dub. No questions asked, no warning too. Just a lightning strike, Odin swoops in, and he gives you a free W. Now, normally, this would be a good thing, but if you remember what I said about the leveling system earlier in my video, yeah, I think you can already guess the problem. Like, it's free XP, which is fucking detrimental to your progress within the game. So basically, acquiring Odin is actually a big detriment to the game, to the gameplay, to your progression, to the progression system, whatever I'm droning on. This was clearly not a part of the script. I forgot to add it in. I'm always forgetting to add it in shit, but this is a whole segment I forgot to add in. So yeah, Odin kind of sucks. Why couldn't they just make him another Guardian Force? That's what I don't get. Like, this mechanic sucks, especially with this stupid shitty level up system, which makes it even worse. Why not just make him a Guardian Force? That would have been awesome. But no, they did this weird shit. Yeah, very pointless side quest. It's one you should just avoid. If you're looking to play this game for the first time, heed my advice. Don't do the Odin side quest. It's not worth it. It might be fun to acquire an Odin, but yeah, it's just not worth it. Odin sucks. But anyway, that about does it for the gameplay portion of this review, as it's now time to move on to the story. Yay, finally! I get to talk about the story. But, I don't know if I should be getting too excited because I kind of don't like the story all that much. Hey now, let me speak before y'all get riled up. I don't think Final Fantasy VIII has a particularly bad story. None of the Final Fantasies do. It just isn't anywhere close to the level of quality I've come to expect from this franchise. But when you have such incredible, deep, thought-provoking stories, such as 6, 7, 9, and yes, even 13, it's hard to craft a story that is of equal footing. But even then, Final Fantasy VIII's story is riddled with so many flaws that it becomes frustrating to endure. It's frustrating when you introduce such cool concepts and characters, but don't bother to give them any development. We could have, I don't know, spent the third disc focusing on our party's backstories and whatnot, instead of this weird alien invasion shit. I will admit that the third disc is pretty cool and definitely features some of the most stunning visual moments throughout the game. But narratively speaking, it's not all that cohesive. It's entertaining as hell, sure, but watching the writers throw a bunch of proverbial shit at the wall just to see what sticks doesn't make for a well-rounded narrative. Especially when, again, some of the ideas you bring to the table receive little to no development. And nothing in this game suffers from a lack of development more than the characters. Let's get the villains out of the way first. Ultimecia, the main baddie in more ways than one, is often subject to claims like, "Oh, she just comes out of nowhere, man. She's such a random villain. She gets no development. She just comes out of fucking nowhere. Only gets 20 minutes of screen time. Fucking awful villain, man." Which is true to an extent, but I think people tend to over-exaggerate this flaw with her character. The whole time compression thing is subtly implied with the whole time travel shenanigans early on in the game, and it's clear that there's a truly powerful force of nature pulling the strings and setting up pretty much every event that goes on within the story. It just becomes clear and more explicit upon defeating Nadia, who eventually reveals that the namesake sorceress was controlling her. Ultimecia is more of an ambiguous, underlying threat you learn more about over time, as opposed to someone like Kefka or Sephiroth, who are more explicitly evil and interesting as villains because of how purely wicked they are. And I think that Ultimecia is a good villain and has good motives as a villain. If you were paying attention over the course of your playthrough, you'd notice that the sorceresses of this world are always getting fucked over. The people use them for their powers, yet, in return, they treat them as if they were lesser than humans. Monsters, if you will. Remember when Rinoa got possessed, and the first thing that happened to her was she got shoved inside of a laboratory? Remember how frightened she sounded? She knew that, because she was now a sorceress, nobody would ever want to be around her. And I think that goes a long way in illustrating the way sorceresses are treated and viewed in this universe. Hell, Adia also alludes to this during her speech in Daylene City. So Ultimecia's goal is to manipulate time in an attempt to circumvent all of this bigotry. She is so bitter towards humanity and their treatment of sorceresses that she tries to achieve time compression and live in a world where only she exists. I should mention that this is something I've only theorized because the game doesn't do the best job in solidifying what her ambitions were. Or maybe it was meant to be a matter of interpretation. I don't know. Speaking of which, I've read up on a few other theories that are equally as interesting. I am not talking about the Rinoa's Ultimecia theory because that is some Wattpad tier shit. It's also been debunked too, I think. The theory that stuck out to me the most is how Ultimecia is a reflection of Squall's worst traits. Think about it. Throughout the first half or so of the game, Squall is reserved and introverted, refusing to rely on others and always wishing to be left alone. So here comes Ultimecia, who looks to achieve time compression so she may be alone forever. We obviously see Squall develop and eventually learn to put his trust in others, but in order for his character to completely develop, he must defeat the entity who shares and represents those same qualities about himself, qualities that he outright resents. So yeah, Ultimecia, cool villain, awesome villain, but one I think should have been elaborated just a bit better. However, the other two main villains in this game unfortunately fall flat. Adele. Wow. Adele. If you want to talk about a villain who comes out of nowhere, then save those complaints for Adele, not Ultimecia. She doesn't even appear until halfway through the third disc, and she ends up getting kicked to the curb just a few hours later. She serves little to no purpose in supporting themes or plot outside of her just being another person for Ultimecia to control. And apparently she's pretty fucking stupid too. How is it that such an all-powerful sorceress can be fooled by some dumbass like Laguna? Don't get me wrong, I like Laguna, but come on, he ain't the smartest of the bunch, and for Adele to fall for such a blatantly obvious trap hurts her as an antagonist. But hey, she's good gender fluid non-binary representation. Even though Quinn is much better representation for that archetype. But besides from that, Adele's a suck-ass villain. But there lies an even worse example of a villain getting the shaft, and that's Cypher. This is more of a personal gripe and not a case of legitimately bad writing, but I just hated to see how such an interesting rivalry between him and Squall, and also Zell to an extent, got tossed aside so that Cypher could become Ultimecia's bitch. Like, literally. Everything this man does, from the Timber segment all the way until the end of the game, everything he does is for the sorceress. He stops being an engaging character, and instead becomes a puppet both figuratively and literally. I mean, yeah, you have a few laughably easy bosses with Cypher, but at this point, he's only fighting you to appease the sorceress. There's no personal motivation for him outside of being the sorcerer's knight, and I think that's just super lame. I mentioned that this isn't a result of objectively bad writing, but rather direction I just simply did not care for. When taking the dichotomy between Cypher and Squall into account, I was very much anticipating an interesting rivalry. But of course, the rug was pulled from underneath my feet, and all I'm left with was a broken ass bone and disappointment. Oh well, looks like Cypher will have to stick to bullying Roxas, I guess. And the main cast of the game, you know, the characters you actually play as, are even more disappointing. Sure, Squall and Rinoa get developed pretty well enough, but it doesn't take long into the game for it to become the Squall and Rinoa show. God damn. They're the two main protagonists, so obviously, much of the screen time will be devoted to them. But holy shit, could we have learned at least a little bit about the other four party members? Could we have gotten a cast of characters that can't be described in 10 or less words? Actually, I'm gonna prove that point. I'll do that right now. I will fucking describe these characters in 10 fucking words or less, cause that's all you can do to fucking describe them. Selfie, ditzy transfer student. Irvin, perpetually horny cowboy. Quistis, the depressed woman with a rather interesting weapon choice. Zell, loudmouth who loves hot dogs. Yes, I know they're not actually hot dogs, that's just what the localization tells us. Same way Brock from Pokemon was eating jelly donuts instead of onigiri. But getting back on track, we learned so little about these characters' lives that my brief descriptions of them tells you everything you need to know about them. Final Fantasy has had a host of characters who received minimal development, with some examples being Gao, Amarant, and Kimahri. But we at least got to learn a little bit about them. The story would take a short break from the main plot to focus on a less important character to give them an arc of their own. The best example of this is Freya Crescent from Final Fantasy IX. I won't get too deep into it because that's the next game I'm going to review, so it'd be a waste of time doing a whole character analysis of my favorite character in the franchise. Either way, Freya doesn't exactly get the most character development. She's been heavily criticized for basically being a puppet at the end of the second disc or whatever. But even she gets an arc of her own that lasts a few hours with the whole Burmecia and Clara arc. So even she gets that. And Kimahri, getting back to Kimahri from Final Fantasy X, even he gets his small arc during the Mount Gakazet portion, where he proves the strength of the Ronso brothers that have heckled him his entire life. That's about the most you get for Kimahri, but fuck man, those two examples I listed, those two still consists of way more development than anyone in FF8 receives besides Squall and Rinoa. We learn next to nothing about where they come from, what their lives were like prior to the events of the game, so on and so forth. I mean, Selphie comes from the Trabia Garden, and Zell grew up in Balam. But like, we learn nothing about his relationship with his ma, or what Selphie's life was like in Trabia Garden. We don't learn shit. Fucking shit. Nothing. Nada. Not a thing. We don't even see any internal conflicts get resolved, nor do we see them try to redeem any personal flaws that they have, because they don't have either of these. These characters are about as one-note as it gets. Sure, the writers at least try to give the characters some flaws, but they end up doing nothing with them. For example, I mentioned that Zell was a loudmouth and the type of guy who speaks without thinking. He unknowingly blurted out that they were from Balam Garden during the Timber arc, which could have easily resulted in the garden getting nuked out the ass. Obviously the garden didn't get nuked out the ass, but it was like about to. It was so fucking close. They narrowly avoided that shit. But anyway, does Zell learn anything at all from this fatal mistake? Does he learn to cool his temper, or does the sword just go on from there as if nothing happened and Zell learns absolutely nothing? Well, I think you already know the answer to that question. Hell, he ends up making the exact same mistake again after Ultimecia gains control over Rinoa. They were also setting up a possible romantic relationship between Irvin and Selphie, only for the game to eventually drop this concept entirely. It's just so disappointing, and at times even a little frustrating how half-written these characters ended up being. Nothing these characters go through even remotely resembles an arc. They're just the guys who got strung along with the two main protagonists, I guess. Yes men, if you will. Even their personalities are incredibly nondescript and generic. There's just nothing that defines them as characters. There were also times where I felt like these characters were highly derivative of archetypes from previous Final Fantasies. Zell, for instance, is just a poor man's Sabin. Selphie is just Yuffie, but worse. And hell, even Rinoa resembled Aerith a bit at times. The only thing we are actually given to tie each of our characters together is this stupid fucking amnesia plot twist. Turns out that all of a sudden, the characters one by one remember that they all grew up in the same orphanage, but because of the usage of Guardian Forces, memories of their childhood were wiped until they all conveniently just remember that they grew up with each other. Oh, this is absolutely awful. Like, this part of the story is so fucking unbelievable. During my first playthrough, I thought about dropping the game. And anytime I have to sit through these stupid fucking cutscenes again, I just get the biggest grimace on my face. It is so bad, and this is for many, many reasons. Let's start with the obvious, the elephant in the room. It's a poor plot device. It comes off as written out of convenience, rather than giving us something interesting and organic to develop our characters with. Instead of having the characters bond naturally like literally any other Final Fantasy was able to accomplish, the writers resort to taking liberties with their work, and it feels tacked on and lazy. It's like the writers realize that these characters don't develop at all, so they just threw their hands in the air and said, fuck it, amnesia plot twist. They forgot about their childhood because reasons, and they suddenly remember because reasons. I'm fucking brilliant. Brilliant writing. I understand the underlying message that the whole GF amnesia has. It's essentially a metaphor for the loss of childhood innocence. But that alone doesn't save the scene from its abundance of issues. Oh, and by the way, plot convenience isn't the only issue that the scene has. There are at least a handful of others, but the one that stuck out to me is how inconsequential this reveal ended up feeling. It leaves very little impact on the story, and honestly, I don't think that the story would really be any different had this plot twist been ignored. Hell, I think the story would have been better off without it, because at the end of the day, actual character growth is far more important than any of the absurd shortcuts the writers took here. Like, these are professional fucking writers. Why are they stupid to such low fucking levels of writing? Also, how the fuck is Irvin the one who remembered everything while everyone else just took a minute for them to catch on? Yes, I know that he says his garden doesn't use GS, but that to me doesn't make any sense. Why the hell would one garden use GS but other gardens don't? Am I missing something? Am I missing some piece of context that would make this make sense? Because as it stands now, it makes no sense. Why would one garden use GS while the other not? It is just ridiculous. And again, I'm going to make this argument yet again. This whole thing feels like it was written for convenience's sake. It's hard to believe how a Final Fantasy game, a franchise well known for having fantastic organic writing, would stoop to such a lazy and boring method of writing. Final Fantasy VIII's writing is so weak, it feels like I'm playing a game from a totally different franchise. Compare this cast of characters to any other party in an FF game and well, there is no comparison. With the exception of the old school NES games because of, technology, and Final Fantasy XII, Final Fantasy VIII has a cast that gets blown out of the water by every other cast in the series. Final Fantasy VI, Final Fantasy VII, Final Fantasy IX, Final Fantasy X, Final Fantasy XIII, even the Dubro quadrant from Final Fantasy XV is better, and from what I've read in the reviews, Final Fantasy XVI has a good fucking party too. Just all in all, Final Fantasy VIII has a weak cookie cutter cast. There are 2 characters who saves this entire game from being a complete dumpster fire, but their names are Rinoa and Squall. I have a rather intriguing relationship with Squall. When I first played this game, I thought he was awful. Worst Final Fantasy protagonist and one of the worst characters I've ever seen in general. But following this 3rd playthrough, I was enlightened. I had finally grasped what I was initially unable to understand. I finally realized that Squall is a fantastic character and has one of the best written arcs in all of Final Fantasy. I found his character growth to be incredibly endearing, not only because of how relatable it was, but just how organic it felt. Squall has some of the most natural character development in the series. It is almost shocking how completely human it feels. And we have no one but Rinoa to thank, as she was absolutely pivotal for Squall's character arc. I know I trashed the other party members a fair amount, but I will give Quistis a little bit of credit for her juxtaposition between her and Rinoa. I'll reiterate that most of these characters have the depth of a kiddie pool, but there are some pretty nuanced contrasts between the 2 gals and their methods of getting Squall to express himself. Remember that one exchange early on in the game between Squall and Quistis? The one where text boxes moved at a crawl space? Initially, one would understandably find this obnoxious, but once you figure out the narrative purpose behind this fixed text box sequence, you'd come to the realization that this was a brilliant storytelling device. The wide gaps between text boxes, coinciding with the scene's silence, creates this awkward tension between the 2 characters. It illustrates how disinterested Squall is by Quistis' demands. And this is precisely because Quistis was encouraging Squall to open up to fulfill her own personal desires. In other words, she wished for Squall to reciprocate the feelings she had for him, whereas Rinoa wished for Squall to open up because she knew that, deep down, Squall was a friendly and caring person. She knew there existed a kind-hearted person beneath that careless demeanor of his. Rinoa just wanted him to be more vocal and expressive about it. And where Squall felt annoyed towards Quistis' advances, evidenced by his talk to a wall remark, Squall found Rinoa's antics endearing. These feelings remained pretty internal, and Squall would end up subconsciously rejecting these feelings, but now see, here's where it starts to get really interesting and really heartwarming too. Many have written off Squall's feelings towards Rinoa starting in the 3rd disc as sudden and forced. I was quite guilty of this myself. But if you were really paying attention, Squall was already beginning to fall for Rinoa upon meeting her at that dance. Squall just couldn't express them yet, as he didn't have her to help guide his growth. And over the course of the game, Rinoa would help Squall learn to express his feelings. And because of Rinoa, Squall was indeed able to become friendlier. He learned to care for and rely on his friends. Rinoa helped to open up a part of Squall that was kept locked away for years. So when Rinoa became possessed in the 3rd disc, it felt as if a piece of Squall had died. The girl who had helped emotionally guide him was unconscious and could have possibly stayed that way forever. This is why you see Squall suddenly burst. This is why you see Squall go to the greatest lengths to try and save her, even going so far as to venture into space with a little oxygen. During a scene that, I swear, was influenced by 2001: A Space Odyssey. Let's try and use this in a more realistic context for a moment. Let's play a real life scenario for a moment. Imagine you're an introverted guy who bottles up all of his feelings. Moi, for example. You hate that aspect of yourself. You hate your inability to express care toward your loved ones. You hate that part of yourself. But then, you meet someone who tries their absolute damnedest to get you to talk more often. You continue to explicitly deny your feelings, but deep down inside, you know for a fact that you're grateful towards this person for helping you get out of your shell. You owe them a lot for changing you, allowing you to grow as a person. Now imagine if that person was just taken away from you, and you don't have any way to save them. Wouldn't that hurt? Wouldn't that just suck ass? With this analogy in mind, Squall's behavior during this portion of the game should make total sense. And when Renoa is eventually saved, true beauty ensues. Their development is exactly what made the Eyes on Me scene so amazing. To just watch these two characters grow, watch Renoa influence Squall's newfound behavior, and having him learn how to express his feelings and become more friendlier, and learn that he can indeed rely on others. It just all adds up into creating this really beautiful relationship that gets displayed in one of the most touching and affectionate and evocative scenes in Final Fantasy history. It's a great fucking scene. And I am just throwing my fists in the air like a coked up gorilla because the rest of the cast could have had development as spectacular as this. But oh well, it is what it is. In spite of the rampant mediocrity this game suffers from, it sure did handle its romance arc with sincere evocation. I don't think this has the best romance arc in the series. It's still Tidus and Yuna for me, but it's certainly up there. Squall and Renoa, great characters, great relationship. I hope they live a nice, long, and happy life together. Hell, I'll even cater their wedding if I must. I'll become the godfather of their fucking child if I must. But unfortunately, pretty much everything else regarding the characters is just plain mid, as is the game in general. I forgot to talk about Laguna and his trio of bros, but not much to discuss there. I like the contrast between Laguna's silliness with Squall's grumpiness, but overall, the flashback sequences were a bit of a drag. They do help communicate the themes of the story pretty well, but, as individual set pieces within the game, I felt they were kind of boring. So was the gameplay, with its not very intuitive system that requires way too much time in the menu and not nearly enough in terms of fun combat scenarios, resulting in some rather boring and drawn out gameplay, no pun intended. Yeah, sorry, but I just did not care for this game all too much. But let's look at it this way. At least I learned to appreciate some aspects of it over time. Had I reviewed this game after my initial playthrough, this entire review would have been bitter as hell. I would have been screaming my ass off. Well, actually not. I probably would have been slouching and trying to keep myself awake. This game bored me so fucking much that I just wanted it to be done. I was crawling like a snail toward the finish line. Luckily, I found plenty of things to enjoy about this game, so take that for what it's worth, I guess. I still didn't like the game all that much though, and there now lies the question of whether or not I'll ever bother to play it again. I mentioned that I haven't gone through the little Card Club and Queen of Cards minigame, despite loving Triple Triad so much, so there's that at least influencing my decision whether or not I play this game ever again. But either way, I'll answer that question with a probably not. And if I do go for a fourth playthrough, it's not going to be for a very long time. I ended up playing this game twice front to back in a span of 5-6 months. So yeah, needless to say, I am fucking kind of sick of this game. I don't want to touch it for a while. Most of my praise is toward the story anyway, so if I wanted to get my fix on Final Fantasy VIII, I can just watch some Squall and Renoa interactions on YouTube, or listen to the OST again. That way, I can experience the best of what this game has to offer, without having to suffer with the arduous fucking Junction system ever again. God fucking damn it, I don't like this system. Yeah, in spite of all the great stuff I went over in this review, I just think that as a whole experience within the Final Fantasy franchise, Final Fantasy VIII is just exceptionally underwhelming. I'm feeling a strong 5 to a light 6 on Final Fantasy VIII. See you bitches later.